Welcome to Oklahoma Contemporary's version of The Art of Food, our latest exhibition here in the Eleanor Kirkpatrick Main Gallery at Oklahoma Contemporary. We're thrilled to share this dynamic collection of works with our visitors. We've got 100 objects by 36 artists, really ranging from some titans of the 20th century to some up-and-coming artists who are making a name for themselves here in the 21st century. The exhibition is organized by the University of Arizona Art Museum and Olivia Miller, and all the works that you see are taken from the Jordan D. Schnitzer and his Family Foundation collection. So shout out to both Olivia and to the Jordan Schnitzer Foundation for creating this fantastic show that we're sharing with our audiences here in Oklahoma City. The themes present in the show are very relatable. It's all about food. So it talks about food in ways ranging from agriculture, food production, foodways, family, community, 7 sections in total that do a little bit more deep digging on what food means to us and our relationship to food and to food production. So I look forward to sharing a few more highlights, and the next section of this video will do a deep dive on a few objects. So come along me and I'll show you some things. In this case, we've got the American artist Chris Anteman. As you immediately lay your eyes on this, they might glaze over because you are immediately thinking of objects that may be in grandma's china hutch. But if you peek a little more closely, you can tell something else is going on with this composition. If it seems familiar, it's because this work is in porcelain. And in fact, the artist Chris works directly with Meissen, which is the oldest and longest running ceramics and porcelain manufacturer in Europe. So a lot of those objects dating from the 18th century, the figurine style porcelains, those were created in the same manufacturer, the same factory that the artist here, Chris, is working. In the artist's case, she is interested less in some of those staid sociabilité style of figurines that depicted bourgeois and aristocratic life around Europe. So she's taking some things that are recognizable, but making them a little bit strange. For example, number one, we've got a lady on all fours in the middle of a table full of food, very opulent, rich cuisines, fruits, cakes, desserts, pastries, gravies, all kinds of things. And then most immediately, we've got a gentleman with his shirt off, so it is obviously a different kind of party. What's interesting too, as you connect a little bit more with the composition, the lady seated here, who is in the middle of enjoying some food, is spying directly with a side eye toward our friend here on the table. But the gentleman who's shirtless and enjoying some quaffable substance in that goblet, he is looking away from the table. Outside the confines of the composition, we have no idea what he might be looking at, but whatever he is coveting, it's certainly not on the table. By Enrique Chigoya. You might immediately see it and your mind may turn to Andy Warhol, the iconic pop artist who is well known for taking everyday objects, perhaps most famously Campbell's soup cans, and replicating them in screen prints and other forms, again and again, iterating ad nauseum. In this case, we have an appropriation of an appropriation. Enrique is directly engaging with the legacy that Andy Warhol created with his embrace of the pop art medium and everyday objects. However, in this case, he is tweaking it just a little bit. The contents of the soup cans here, if our label is any guide, is not your standard Campbell's soup. Not good enough for Enrique Chigoya. Rather, he is directly taking aim at the entire art world and the collecting ecosystem, art dealers, museums, artists themselves, fundraisers, and so on. And really unpacking a primary critique of the museum industry as a whole, that it has meaningful ties directly to the legacy of colonialism. The idea of looting artworks from around the world, stealing them from cultures, and displaying them in major cities in Europe and the United States of America. The museum, as we understand it, was really codified in the 19th century, and the legacy that's tied to some of those original acts of collecting and classifying and legacies of colonialism are pretty tightly documented. You may be familiar with some things that are happening in our contemporary moment where objects are being returned to cultures and countries from which they originally came, whether that's places like Cambodia, Italy, France. There's been a lot of dialogue about repatriating artworks that were improperly stolen or purchased without provenance from centuries back, objects that date all the way to the very beginning of art history in some cases. In this case, it's contemporary, it's fresh, and it's cheeky. This artist is not advocating any sort of violence or any ill will. It's really just a critique that's meant in the spirit of social engagement and less by any meaningful actions. And I have on good authority from the lenders and the artists, no human beings were harmed in the making of this artwork. But if you zoom in on the titles a little bit, you'll see artist's brain with rice. You'll see different recipes about critics, about fundraisers, models, and then there's even a target on my back. There's museum director's tripe. So again, something that is engaging both with really critical issues connected to art and the collecting of art, but doing so in a way that's fun and also engaging with the history of art, in this case, pop art and Andy Warhol. You might not associate this style of work with Andy Warhol's typical use of everyday objects and close association with the pop art movement. However, like many artists, he had a wide varying style, and he created works long before he became an internationally prominent contemporary artist. His work in the field of art dates back to really his childhood. In this case, we have these two small-scale watercolors depicting life in a Pittsburgh bar. These were created just a couple of years after Warhol was graduated from high school. He's still living in Pittsburgh. He's yet to embark on his career in New York City. So here he is depicting some things that also may be at odds with how we typically understand watercolors as vibrant and fun. It's what we use with our children when we're teaching them about painting, rather than those more vibrant or potentially some misperceptions of frivolous subject matter for watercolors. He's using the medium to document everyday life in a bar in Pittsburgh, and it's not really necessarily fun. There's a sadness, there's a melancholy to these watercolors, which is really a stark departure from a lot of the work that we associate with the artist, which is fun and engaging with icons of pop culture. You know, this is more everyday people in a quiet setting, in a bar, drinking, perhaps drinking away their sorrows. These types of works are rarely displayed. There aren't a huge number of watercolors from an artistic output because he pivoted away and into other materials and ideas and disciplines as he grew as an artist. So this is a rare opportunity for our audiences here in Oklahoma to engage with some rarely seen works by one of the 20th century's most important artists, made when he was just starting out in his career, barely 20 years old. If you've been to the Art Center before, you may remember seeing Ed Ruscha OKLA that we organized and exhibited in 2021. We're thrilled to have some objects by one of our favorite artists back in the gallery. In this case, we've got news, muse, pews, brews, stews, and dews. It's immediately recognizable as the artist's style. You have the wordplay, the Gothic font. In this case, he's riffing a little bit on some lightly poking fun at perhaps British culture, the cultures of the UK, both with the Gothic print style and the pronunciation, perhaps using that liquid U as we're breezing through each of the pronunciations of those words. And also what's interesting about this collection, while this series was not exhibited in our exhibition OKLA, we did replicate it in our catalog for its art historical relevance and connection to the artist's style. In particular, this grouping was made in, this print series was made in 1970 at a time when Ed was really moving away from his traditional methods and production techniques. So he forswore oil painting. He said he wasn't going to oil paint for a while. He may have thought he wouldn't ever touch oil paint again. Of course, he would later pick up oil and then acrylic and return to some of those media that he started out with in the 1950s and 60s. But in this case, he was turning to alternative materials. And some of those alternative materials were axle grease and gunpowder, and many more, in fact, were food. So just in these 6 prints, the artist is using, to make pigments, to make the colors that you see represented here in the prints, he's using bolognese sauce, cherry pie filling, crushed daffodils, coffee, all kinds of different food items to get the desired color, the textures that he's looking for. And because those materials are not time-tested art historical methods and techniques, they don't necessarily have the longevity in terms of their stability that we would associate with oil paint, for example. So you will see over time these will be degrading, and indeed stews may appear very light on your video screen, and likewise mews up here. That does indicate that those materials gradually over time are diminishing in their vibrancy or in their color saturation, and that was definitely part of the intention. Using things like lettuce and carrot, it was an experiment, it was a work of conceptual art for the artist, and that is present today in these objects, you know, over 50 years after their original production. Thanks for joining us for this virtual tour of the Art of Food. The exhibition is on view for our public until mid-May. And make sure that you have a stop by Cafe Contemporary here during your visit. The brand new Cafe Contemporary, reimagined with a new group from Dough Days, is creating delectable confections, pastries. We've got vegan options, we've got vegetarian options, soups, sandwiches, salads, a beautiful coffee program, and very shortly we'll be rolling out beer, wine, and cocktails. The perfect place to unwind right after work for happy hour, to come have brunch with your friends on the weekend, or to take a little inspiration from the Art of Food and find out what most closely hews to your tastes from this menu and what ties into the gallery. We hope you enjoy your visit here at Oklahoma Contemporary. Be sure to stop by our friends at Cafe Contemporary to get some food and drinks. Cheers.